I'm Isadora, 27 years old, and I never thought I'd be sharing this story. Christmas dinner was supposed to bring families together, but mine fell apart that night. I'd spent years trying to earn my place as a successful children's book illustrator, but nothing was ever enough. When my dad pointed his finger at me across our perfectly set table and said, "No one in this family wants you here tonight," something inside me changed. I smiled back and whispered, "All right." If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're from. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up to family who couldn't see your worth, and stay tuned for what happened when I finally found my voice. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, I was the middle child in what appeared to be the perfect American family from the outside. My father, Gary, was a high-profile attorney at one of the city's most prestigious law firms. He commanded respect everywhere he went with his tailored suits, firm handshake, and unwavering confidence. At home, that confidence translated into an unyielding expectation of excellence and obedience from his children. Every decision in our household ultimately required his approval, and questioning his authority was simply not tolerated. My mother, Diane, worked as a successful real estate agent, though her career always took a backseat to my father's. She specialized in luxury properties, which complemented my father's professional network. Mom was the perfect counterbalance to Dad's rigidity, soft-spoken, accommodating, and expert at smoothing over tense situations. "Your father means well," she would whisper after his outbursts. "He just wants what's best for you." Over time, I realized her peacekeeping was actually enablement, a pattern that allowed his controlling behavior to flourish unchecked. My older brother Thomas was the golden child of the family. 3 years my senior, he followed our father's path with an almost eerie precision, debate team captain pre-law at Dad's alma mater, and eventually joining a prestigious law firm. Dad beamed with pride at every accomplishment, from Thomas's high school graduation speech to his law school acceptance. "Now that's a Carter," he would say, clapping my brother on the shoulder. Thomas absorbed our father's values completely, viewing the world through the same lens of status and achievement. Katie, my younger sister by 4 years, developed an entirely different survival strategy. As the baby of the family, she became our mediator, the one who could sense tension building and diffuse it with a well-timed joke or question. "Dad, tell us about your big case," she would interject when she saw his displeasure building toward me. She was sweet and genuine, but had learned early that keeping peace was her primary value in our family system. And then there was me, Isadora, the middle child, the odd one out. From my earliest memories, I found myself questioning the values that seemed so important in our household. While my family attended country club events and networked with the right people, I preferred spending hours with my sketchbooks in the window seat of my bedroom. When Dad hosted lavish dinner parties for colleagues and clients, I would observe the performative nature of these gatherings, secretly sketching the forced smiles and stiff postures of adults pretending to enjoy themselves. My passion for art emerged early. I was drawing before I could properly write, creating detailed worlds populated with curious creatures and brave children. My elementary school teachers would display my work and suggest art programs, but my parents dismissed these recommendations. "Drawing is a nice hobby, Isadora," my mother would say, "but it's not something serious people pursue as a career." My father was more direct. "Artists don't pay mortgages, Isadora. Focus on your real subjects." Despite their discouragement, I continued creating in private, filling sketchbook after sketchbook. I saved my allowance and birthday money for art supplies, hiding my growing collection under my bed. When I was 14, my high school art teacher, Mrs. Lambert, recognized something in my work that changed everything. After class one day, she held up my illustration of a girl riding a dragon over a cityscape. "Isadora, this isn't just good. This is special. You have a unique perspective that tells stories beyond the image itself." She became my first real mentor, staying after school to teach me techniques, lending me books on illustration, and eventually helping me prepare a portfolio for college applications. The real conflict with my father erupted during my senior year of high school. College application season arrived, and Dad had already mapped out my future pre-law at his alma mater, followed by law school, then joining Thomas at his firm. "The Carter family legacy," he called it during one of his monologues at dinner. I sat silently, pushing food around my plate, knowing the storm that was coming. "Actually, Dad," I finally said, voice barely above a whisper, "I've applied to Rhode Island School of Design for illustration." The silence was deafening. My mother's fork paused midair. Katie stared at her plate. Thomas looked at me with a mixture of shock and something else, perhaps a hint of admiration quickly suppressed. "Absolutely not." Dad's voice was calm, which was always more frightening than his yelling. "No daughter of mine is wasting her potential drawing pictures. I've already spoken to my contacts at Dartmouth." "But I don't want to be a lawyer," I replied, my voice stronger now. "I want to be an illustrator. Mrs. Lambert thinks I have real talent." "Mrs. Lambert," he laughed dismissively, "the art teacher who drives that rusted Toyota." "That's whose life advice you're taking." The argument escalated over the following weeks, culminating in an ultimatum: follow his plan or lose his financial support. I chose my dream. The acceptance letter from RISD arrived in April, along with a partial scholarship that wouldn't nearly cover the full cost. Dad remained true to his word. Not a penny would come from him for this foolishness. I worked 3 part-time jobs throughout college: barista mornings, campus library afternoons, and waitressing weekends. I lived on ramen and coffee, sharing a cramped apartment with 3 other art students to save on rent. Every break, I returned home to a chilly reception. Dad would barely acknowledge my presence beyond required pleasantries when others were around. Mom would slip me small amounts of money when he wasn't looking, whispering that she was proud of me, but never saying it when it mattered. In front of him. Holidays became exercises in tension management, with Katie working overtime to maintain a facade of family harmony that didn't exist. Through it all, I kept drawing, painting, and creating. Each semester's portfolio review brought stronger feedback from my professors. "You're finding your voice," my illustration professor told me during junior year. "Your work is becoming unmistakably yours." I held on to those words during the hardest days, when exhaustion and doubt crept in, when the weight of my family's disappointment felt crushing. What my family never understood was that their rejection only fueled my determination. Each dismissal of my path became another reason to prove them wrong. Not out of spite, but because I needed to prove to myself that I had made the right choice in following my heart. Graduation day at RISD should have been purely triumphant. I had not only survived, but thrived, graduating with honors, despite the financial struggles and family pressure. My senior thesis exhibition had drawn attention from several visiting professionals, including a junior editor from a children's publishing house in New York. As I stood in my cap and gown, I scanned the audience, still harboring a childish hope that my family would surprise me by showing up. Mom and Katie came. They sat in the back row, applauded politely when my name was called, and gave me awkward hugs afterward. "Your father sends his congratulations," Mom said, not meeting my eyes. We all knew it was a lie. Thomas was too busy with a case to attend. The celebration dinner was at a chain restaurant, brief and subdued, before they caught their flight back to Portland. With my degree in hand and a small portfolio of my best work, I moved to New York City for an internship at Brightwater Publishing. The reality of postgraduate life hit hard. My tiny apartment in Brooklyn had a bathtub in the kitchen and windows that rattled with every passing truck. The internship paid barely enough to cover ramen and rent, and my supervisor seemed to view me as nothing more than a coffee retrieval system. The first 6 months were brutal. I sent my portfolio to 13 publishers and received 13 rejection letters. "Too whimsical," said one. "Not commercial enough," said another. "We like your technique, but don't see where you would fit in our lineup," said most. I started to wonder if my father had been right all along. Maybe this was foolishness, a childish dream that wouldn't translate to actual survival. On particularly low days, I would call Katie, the only family member who still regularly took my calls. "Maybe you should come home," she suggested gently during one tear-filled conversation. "Dad never stays mad forever. He could help you get a position at a marketing firm or something." I was tempted, but the thought of returning home defeated, of seeing the satisfaction in my father's eyes when my art phase ended as he predicted, it was unbearable. I took on freelance graphic design work, creating logos for small businesses and illustrations for local newspapers. I lived on dollar pizza and free food from app promotions. I was exhausted but determined. The breakthrough came 9 months after graduation. Carol Winters, a newly promoted editor at Sunbeam Children's Books, spotted my sample illustrations at an industry showcase where my former internship supervisor had included my work. She called me directly the next day. "There's something distinctive about your style," she said. "The way you blend whimsy with authentic emotion. We're developing a new series called Moonlight Meadows about animal friends who solve problems together. Would you be interested in submitting some character sketches?" I stayed up 3 nights straight working on those sketches, pouring everything I had into them. The main character, a brave little rabbit named Luna, emerged fully formed, as though she'd been waiting in my imagination all along. 2 weeks after submission, I received the offer to illustrate the first book in the series with the potential for more if it performed well. That first Moonlight Meadows book changed everything. Children responded to Luna, and her friends' parents appreciated the subtle emotional intelligence woven into the stories. Bookstores began requesting author and illustrator visits. The second and third books were fast-tracked, and suddenly I found myself with a career. A real career. Doing exactly what I had always dreamed of. The series won the Caldecott Honor, one of the most prestigious awards in children's literature. My work was featured in publishing magazines. Schools invited me to speak to their students about pursuing creative dreams. And with each success, I hoped that maybe finally my family would see that my choice had been valid. But validation never came. When I called home with news of the award, my mother said, "That's nice, dear. Did you hear Thomas made partner at the firm?" My father, on the rare occasions when he would take the phone, would listen to my news with audible impatience before changing the subject. "Real estate is booming here," he would say. "Your mother sold 3 houses last month." Thomas was no better, responding to a signed copy of my book with a brief email. "Looks cute. Do they pay you enough to live on with these things?" Katie tried her best, proudly displaying my books in her apartment, but she was careful never to mention them around our father. As my professional life blossomed, I built a new kind of family in New York. Fellow illustrators and writers who understood the creative process. Neighbors in my building who celebrated each new book release. And eventually Michael, a kind, thoughtful graphic designer I met at a publishing industry event. Michael grew up in a warm, supportive family that embraced creativity. The first time I joined them for dinner at his parents' home in Connecticut, his mother had my books displayed proudly on their coffee table. His father asked thoughtful questions about my creative process. His sister, a musician, talked about the parallels between our art forms. I cried in the car on the drive back to the city, mourning the family support I had never experienced. "Your family's treatment of you isn't about you," Michael said gently, holding my hand across the center console. "It's about their own limitations, their inability to see value in anything that doesn't fit their narrow definition of success." With Michael's support and the perspective gained from therapy, I began to recognize the toxic patterns in my family dynamics. I set boundaries around my interactions with them, limited my visits home, and focused on nurturing relationships that were genuinely supportive. I was building a life I loved, creating work that mattered to me, and finding peace with who I was, with or without my family's approval. But there was still a wounded child inside me who wanted her father to be proud, who yearned for her mother's genuine support, who wished her brother could see her as an equal. And it was that vulnerable part of me that answered the phone when my mother called about Christmas dinner. "Isadora, we expect you home for Christmas this year," my mother said, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. It wasn't a question or an invitation. It was a summons. "I don't know, Mom. I have deadlines, and the last time I came home wasn't exactly pleasant." The previous Thanksgiving had ended with my father lecturing me about growing up and getting a real job, despite the fact that I was financially successful and professionally recognized. "The neighbors keep asking why you're never home for holidays," she continued as if I hadn't spoken. "The Andersons' daughter flies in from Europe every year. What am I supposed to tell people?" There it was. The real concern wasn't my absence, but how it looked to others. "You could tell them I'm busy with my career," I suggested. "Please, Isadora. Your father is, well, he's getting older. Family should be together at Christmas." Her voice softened with what sounded like genuine emotion. "And everyone wants to meet Michael." That caught me off guard. I had mentioned Michael during our brief phone calls, but my family had shown little interest in my relationship. Was this an olive branch? A sign they were finally ready to see me as an adult with a valid life. After the call, I discussed it with Michael. "You don't have to go," he said. "You've given them many chances." I know. I traced the pattern on my coffee mug with my fingertip. But part of me still hopes. Maybe if they see how happy I am, how well I'm doing, maybe if they meet you and see the life we're building. Michael took my hands in his. "I'll support whatever you decide. If you want to go, I'm right there with you. But let's set some boundaries before we go, okay? And have an exit strategy if things get toxic." His concern was touching and necessary. I knew I was walking back into a situation that had hurt me repeatedly, but I also carried news I thought might finally change the dynamic. A major publishing house had offered me a contract for my own original picture book series, with a significant advance, and I had been nominated for another prestigious award. Surely these objective measures of success would finally earn me some respect in my family's eyes. I spent hours shopping for thoughtful Christmas gifts for everyone. For my father, I found a first edition of his favorite legal text, signed by the author. For my mother, I commissioned a delicate necklace with birthstones representing each family member. For Thomas, I tracked down a vintage fountain pen from his law school's heritage collection. For Katie, I framed an original illustration from my first book, featuring a character secretly inspired by her. As our flight approached Portland, my anxiety mounted. Michael squeezed my hand reassuringly as the plane descended through cloud cover, revealing the familiar green landscape below. "Remember," he whispered, "we can leave any time. Your worth isn't determined by their recognition of it." My childhood home looked exactly as it always had, immaculately maintained, tastefully decorated for the season, with greenery and lights that complemented the home's architecture, rather than celebrated the holiday's joy. My mother opened the door before we could knock, her face arranged in a pleasant smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Isadora, darling. And you must be Michael." She air-kissed my cheek and shook Michael's hand. Come in, come in. Your father is in his study on a call, and Thomas and Jessica arrived an hour ago." The entrance hall smelled of pine and cinnamon, the same holiday scent from my childhood. Family photos lined the staircase wall. Thomas's graduation, Katie's dance recitals, family vacations to Martha's Vineyard. My school photos were there, but nothing of my adult accomplishments. No framed covers of my books, no mention of awards. Thomas emerged from the living room, drink in hand. At 30, he looked even more like our father. Confident, polished, successful by all conventional metrics. "The prodigal artist returns," he said with a smirk that could be interpreted as either teasing or condescending. "And with a boyfriend, we were starting to think you'd marry your paintbrushes." "Illustrator," I corrected automatically. "And we use digital tools as much as traditional media now." He waved his hand dismissively. "Same difference. Come meet Jessica. We've been married 6 months now. You'd know that if you came to the wedding." "I was on a book tour in Europe," I reminded him. "I sent a gift." Right. Some kid's book. Very cute." Jessica turned out to be exactly what I'd expected. Beautiful, polished, from a good family with the right connections. She worked in corporate law at Thomas's firm. They had met at a charity gala. Everything about their courtship and marriage had followed the approved script. Katie was the only one who seemed genuinely happy to see me. She bounded down the stairs and threw her arms around me in a real hug. "Sid, I've missed you so much. Is this Michael? I've heard so much about you." Her enthusiasm was a balm after Thomas's cool reception. While we waited for my father to emerge from his study, my mother put me to work helping with dinner preparations. "Not too much garlic, Isadora," she cautioned as I chopped. "Your father doesn't like it when the food is too ethnic." Michael raised an eyebrow at me from across the kitchen, where he was being interrogated by Thomas about his career prospects and family background. I could see him struggling to maintain politeness in the face of questions that bordered on inappropriate. "And your parents are both still working at their age?" Thomas asked with poorly disguised judgment when Michael mentioned his father was a high school art teacher. The kitchen door swung open, and my father entered. At 62, Gary Carter was still an imposing figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair, and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to commanding rooms. He looked first at Michael, assessing him with a quick up and down glance, then at me. "Isadora," he said with a nod that could barely be classified as a greeting. "Hi, Dad," I responded, hating the way my voice automatically softened, how I still instinctively sought his approval despite everything. "This is Michael." Michael stepped forward, hand extended. "Pleasure to meet you, sir. Isadora has told me so much about you." Dad shook his hand briefly. "Has she surprising given how little we hear from her these days?" And so it began. The subtle jabs, the passive-aggressive comments, the clear message that I was an outsider in my own family home. As we moved through Christmas Eve, the tension only grew. Every attempt I made to share news about my career was interrupted or dismissed. When I mentioned my new book contract during appetizers, my father changed the subject to Thomas's recent courtroom victory. When I tried to show my mother the preliminary sketches for my new series on my tablet, she suddenly remembered she needed to check the roast. By dinner time, I was exhausted from the emotional effort of maintaining a pleasant facade. Michael kept shooting me concerned glances, his hand finding mine under the table, whenever my father made a particularly cutting remark. "You're doing great," he whispered when I excused myself to the bathroom to collect my emotions. "We can still leave if you want." But I had come this far, and tomorrow was Christmas. Maybe the gift exchange would provide a moment of connection, a chance for my family to finally see me as I was, not as they wished I would be. Extended family began arriving for Christmas Eve dinner. My father's brother and his wife, my mother's sister, and her husband cousins with their spouses. The house filled with the kind of superficial chatter that passes for connection in my family. "How's the market these days? Did you hear the Johnsons are getting divorced? Thomas, tell everyone about that big case you just won." As we gathered around the elaborately set dining table, I made one last attempt to share my good news. The conversation had momentarily turned to careers with my uncle, asking each of the children about their work. Thomas detailed his latest courtroom triumph to appreciative nods and follow-up questions. Katie talked about her new position in hospital administration, receiving warm congratulations. When attention reluctantly turned to me, I took a deep breath. "Actually, I have some exciting news. My Moonlight Meadows series just got optioned for an animated adaptation, and I've been nominated for the Lowell Award, which is one of the highest honors in children's literature." For a brief moment, there was silence around the table. My aunt, who had always been a bit kinder than the others, smiled. "That's wonderful, Isadora. Are those the books with the sweet little rabbit? My granddaughter loves those." Before I could respond, my father cleared his throat loudly. "I don't think dinner is the appropriate time for self-promotion, Isadora. We were having a pleasant family conversation." "I was just answering Uncle Jim's question about my work," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Well, perhaps we could talk about something more relevant to everyone," he said dismissively. "Thomas, tell everyone about the house you and Jessica are looking at in West Hills." The conversation moved on, leaving me invisible once again. I pushed food around my plate, no longer hungry, feeling Michael's supportive presence beside me like a lifeline. As dessert was served, my mother's traditional Christmas Eve chocolate mousse, my aunt tried again. "Isadora, I'd love to hear more about your books. Are they available at Powell's? I should pick some up for my grandchildren." Before I could answer, my father's patience finally snapped. He stood up, napkin thrown on the table, and pointed directly at me. His voice was cold and deliberate as he spoke the words that would change our family forever. "No one in this family wants you here tonight." The room fell silent. Forks paused midair. Wine glasses remained suspended between table and lips. Every eye turned either to my father, still standing with his accusing finger pointed at me, or to me, sitting frozen under the weight of his public rejection. My mother stared at her dessert, unwilling to look at either of us. Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but said nothing. Katie's eyes filled with tears, but she too remained silent. The extended family members exchanged awkward glances, suddenly very interested in the pattern of the tablecloth or the arrangement of flowers at the center of the table. Michael's hand found mine under the table and squeezed hard. I could feel his body tense beside me, ready to defend me, but I gave his hand a gentle squeeze back, silently asking him to wait. I looked directly at my father, meeting his gaze without flinching for perhaps the first time in my life. Then, surprising even myself, I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile or an angry one. It was the calm, knowing smile of someone who has finally seen a situation with complete clarity. "All right," I whispered just loud enough for everyone to hear. My father faltered slightly, clearly thrown by my calm response. He had expected tears, defensiveness, or an angry exit. Reactions he knew how to handle, ways he knew how to maintain control. My quiet acceptance left him momentarily unmoored. In that brief window of his uncertainty, I slowly rose from my chair. The room remained deathly quiet, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. Would I storm out, break down, start a screaming match? Instead, I reached down for my large tote bag that I had placed beside my chair earlier. With deliberate movements, I began removing carefully wrapped packages, each with a name tag attached. One by one, I placed them on the table in front of their intended recipients. "For you, Dad," I said softly, placing the heavy rectangular package before him. A first edition of Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England, signed by the editor of the 1975 reprint. "You mentioned once it was influential in your decision to pursue law." His eyebrows rose slightly, betraying his surprise at the thoughtfulness of the gift. Without waiting for a response, I moved to my mother. "Mom, this is a custom piece." I placed a small velvet box before her, the birthstones of everyone in the family arranged in a constellation pattern. The jeweler used the night sky from the day you and Dad got married as the template. Her fingers hovered over the box, but she didn't open it, her eyes darting nervously to my father. "Thomas," I continued, placing another small box before my brother. "A Mont Blanc fountain pen from the special edition created for your law school's bicentennial. Only 100 were made." Finally, I turned to my sister. "Katie, this is an original illustration from the first Moonlight Meadows book. The character of the fox who always mediates between the other animals was inspired by you." The methodical distribution of these carefully chosen gifts in the wake of my father's outburst created a surreal atmosphere. My extended family watched in stunned silence, their discomfort now tinged with confusion, and from somewhat looked like newfound respect. I wasn't finished. I returned to my bag and pulled out a leather portfolio, which I opened on the table where everyone could see. Inside were the original concept sketches for my books reviews from major publications and photographs of children lined up at bookstores for my signings. "I've spent years trying to earn your approval," I said, addressing my father but speaking to the entire table. "I thought if I was just successful enough, you might finally see value in the path I chose. So here it is, tangible proof that I haven't been wasting my time drawing pictures." I then removed a folder containing financial documents, bank statements, royalty reports, contracts, and placed them beside the portfolio. "And in case the artistic merit isn't compelling enough, here are the numbers. My last book advance was more than a first-year associate makes at Thomas's firm. My royalties from international sales alone covered the down payment on my apartment in Brooklyn." My father's face had turned an interesting shade of red, but I wasn't speaking with anger. There was no triumph in my voice, no desire to humiliate him. I was simply stating facts that had been ignored for too long. "I came today hoping that maybe finally I could be seen for who I actually am, not who you wanted me to be. But I see now that was never possible. You decided who I was supposed to be before I was even born. And anything that deviated from that script was considered failure." I looked around at the faces of my family members, some embarrassed, some curious, some still processing what was happening. "I want you all to know that I'm establishing a scholarship at Portland Public Schools. It will provide art supplies and mentoring to students who show promise in visual arts, but lack family support or financial resources. I'm naming it after Mrs. Lambert, my high school art teacher who believed in me when no one else did." Michael stood up beside me, his presence solid and supportive. I looked at my father one last time, no longer afraid of his judgment, no longer desperate for his approval. "I no longer need your approval to know my worth," I said simply. Then I picked up my coat and bag, took Michael's hand, and walked out of the dining room, leaving my family in speechless silence. The drive back to our hotel was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Michael kept one hand on the wheel and the other wrapped around mine. The Christmas lights of suburban Portland blurred past our windows, and soft music played from the car stereo. It wasn't until we were safely in our hotel room that I finally allowed myself to process what had happened. "I can't believe I did that," I whispered, sinking onto the edge of the bed. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me shaky, but strangely liberated. 27 years of trying to be good enough, and I just walked away. Michael sat beside me, his arm around my shoulders. "You were magnificent. You stood up for yourself with such dignity." He kissed my temple. "How are you feeling?" I considered the question seriously. Sad, relieved, free, angry, peaceful, all of it at once. "That sounds about right," he said with a small smile. My phone had been buzzing intermittently since we left. I finally looked at it. 3 missed calls from Katie, 2 from my mother, a text from Thomas that simply read, "What the hell was that?" and nothing from my father. I set the phone aside. Whatever fallout was occurring at the house, I didn't need to witness it in real time. For once, their reactions were their responsibility, not mine. Back at my parents' house, my departure had indeed caused a seismic shift in family dynamics. As Michael and I slept in our hotel room, various confrontations were taking place under the Carter family roof. My father had retreated to his study immediately after my exit, pouring himself a generous scotch and shutting the door firmly behind him. He expected the household to proceed as if nothing unusual had happened, a standard approach to emotional disruption in our family. But for once, the remaining family members weren't following the script. In the kitchen, where my mother was aggressively loading the dishwasher to avoid conversation, my aunt cornered her. "Diane, what on earth was that? How could you let Gary speak to Isadora that way?" "You don't understand how difficult she's always been," my mother replied defensively. "Always challenging, always questioning. If she just followed the path we set out—" "The path you set out," my aunt interrupted. "Did it ever occur to you that she might know herself better than you do? That girl has built an impressive career doing what she loves, and neither you nor Gary has shown an ounce of pride or support." In the living room, Thomas was having a rare moment of self-reflection as he examined the pen I had given him. Jessica sat beside him, uncharacteristically quiet. "She remembered," he murmured, turning the pen over in his hands. "I mentioned this edition once, maybe 3 years ago, when we ran into each other at Mom's birthday." "It was a thoughtful gift," Jessica agreed. "All her gifts were thoughtful. She clearly pays attention to what matters to each of you." Thomas frowned. "Dad was out of line tonight." "Has he always been that way with her?" Jessica asked. Thomas started to offer the standard family defense, then stopped himself. "Yes," he admitted. "Always. And I've never said anything. I've even joined in, sometimes making jokes about her little drawings or her artsy lifestyle. I never stopped to think about how that felt for her." In the guest room, Katie was crying as she left her 5th voicemail on my phone. "Sid, please call me back. I'm so sorry. I should have said something. I should have defended you. Please don't disappear again. I love your books. I tell all my friends about my amazing sister, the illustrator. But I never say it in front of Dad because I'm a coward. Please, Sid, I'm so sorry." The most significant confrontation, however, occurred late that night after most of the household had gone to bed. My grandfather, my father's father, had arrived for Christmas morning breakfast, as was tradition. But upon hearing about the evening's events from my aunt, he made his way directly to my father's study. Walter Carter at 84 was still a commanding presence. He knocked once on the study door and entered without waiting for a response. My father looked up, surprised to see his father at this hour. "Dad, what are you doing here so late? Is everything okay?" My grandfather settled heavily into the leather chair across from my father's desk. "No, Gary, everything is not okay. I just heard what happened with Isadora." My father sighed. "She's always been difficult, Dad. You know that. Never willing to follow the plan, always insisting on doing things her own way." "Her own way seems to be working out pretty well for her," my grandfather observed. "From what I hear, she's quite successful doing exactly what she loves." "Drawing pictures for children's books is hardly a respectable career," my father scoffed. "Not for a Carter." My grandfather was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy with regret. "You know I did the same thing to you once." My father looked up sharply. What are you talking about? When you were 16, you wanted to study music. You were talented with that saxophone. Your teacher said you had real potential. But I shut it down. Told you it wasn't a proper career for a man, that you needed to focus on law or business, something respectable. My father shifted uncomfortably. That was different. I was just a kid with a hobby. Was it a hobby, or was it a passion I never let you explore? My grandfather leaned forward. I've regretted that for 50 years, Gary. Watching you build a successful career, but never seeing that spark, that joy in your work that comes from doing what you truly love. I've had a good life, my father insisted. I've provided well for my family. Yes, you have. But at what cost? You're repeating my mistake, only worse. At least I never told you that no one in the family wanted you around. My grandfather stood with some effort. You have a chance I never took, the chance to apologize, to make amends, to be part of your daughter's life on her terms, not yours. Don't waste it out of pride the way I did. As my grandfather left, my father remained in his study, the first edition book I had given him still unwrapped on his desk. For the first time in decades, he found himself questioning the certainties that had guided his life. Christmas morning at the Carter house was subdued. The empty chair at the breakfast table seemed to take up more space than a physical object should be able to occupy. My mother kept glancing at it, then at the door, as if expecting me to appear. Katie's eyes were red from crying. Thomas was unusually quiet, the vintage pen I had given him visible in his shirt pocket. My father moved through the morning rituals mechanically, carving the breakfast ham, distributing gifts from under the tree, maintaining the appearance of normalcy. But the facade was cracking. In quiet moments, when he thought no one was looking, his gaze would drift to the family photos on the mantel, lingering on images of me as a child. Before the rift, before I became a disappointment in his eyes. While helping my mother clear breakfast dishes, he discovered something that shook him. In a drawer he rarely opened, searching for extra napkins, he found copies of all my books carefully preserved. Beside them was a folder containing newspaper clippings and magazine articles about my work awards announcements and publicity photos. "You've been following her career," he said, not a question, but a realization. My mother's cheeks flushed. "Of course I have. She's my daughter." "You never said anything." "Would you have listened?" she asked quietly. "Or would you have just been angry that I was encouraging her foolishness?" He had no answer for that. Later that day, Katie revealed that she had been reading my books to the children in the hospital where she worked. "They love Luna and her friends," she told our father. "There's a waiting list for the reading program when we feature Isadora's books. Kids connect with them because they're honest about difficult feelings, but still hopeful." Even Thomas, in a rare moment of vulnerability, admitted that his law firm colleagues with children had recognized my name when he mentioned his sister was Isadora Carter. "Apparently, I've been the only one who didn't realize how successful she is," he said with uncharacteristic humility. Throughout Christmas Day, these small revelations accumulated, forcing my father to confront the possibility that he had been wrong. Not just about the value of my career choice, but about the rigid value system that had guided his approach to parenting. The foundation of certainty upon which he had built his identity was beginning to crack. 3 days after Christmas, I returned to New York with Michael, uncertain about what the future held for my relationship with my family. I had stood up for myself finally, but at what cost? As our plane touched down at JFK, I felt a curious mixture of grief and liberation. The cord that had bound me to my family's expectations, always pulling me back, always creating tension, had been severed. The loss was painful, but the freedom was exhilarating. "Welcome home," Michael said, as we stepped into our Brooklyn apartment. The space felt different now, more truly mine, more authentically a reflection of the life I had built despite my family's disapproval. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into my work. The new book series I was developing took on deeper themes of belonging and self-acceptance, influenced by my own journey. My agent noticed the evolution in my work. "There's something different here," she said during a review meeting. "The emotions feel more authentic, more raw, like you're not holding back anymore." I began seeing a therapist who specialized in family estrangement and adult children of controlling parents. Dr. Lin helped me process the complex grief of walking away from my family's approval. the guilt that still surfaced despite my intellectual understanding that I had done nothing wrong, and the lingering fear that maybe deep down I truly was a disappointment. "What you're experiencing is very common," she assured me. "You're mourning the family you wished you had the support you deserved but never received. That's a legitimate loss, even if the relationship was unhealthy." With her guidance, I began to separate my sense of worth from my family's validation. I recognized the strength it had taken to pursue my dreams, despite their disapproval, to build a life that was authentic to my values rather than theirs. Slowly, the voice in my head that sounded like my father, critical, dismissive, never satisfied, began to fade, replaced by my own voice proud of what I had accomplished. My chosen family rallied around me. Michael's parents invited us for weekend visits, treating me with the warmth and interest my own parents never had. My friends in the publishing industry celebrated each new success with genuine joy. My editor, Carol, became a mentor and advocate, helping me navigate the business aspects of my career with confidence. 3 months after Christmas, an unexpected email arrived in my inbox. The subject line read simply, "From your father." For several hours, I couldn't bring myself to open it. What more could he have to say? Another criticism. A formal disownment. I finally clicked on it late that night. Michael asleep beside me, the city lights twinkling through our bedroom window. "Isadora," it began formally, "I have spent the past 3 months reflecting on what happened at Christmas dinner, and more broadly on our relationship throughout your life. This is not easy for me to write, as I have never been good at admitting when I am wrong. But I was wrong, deeply fundamentally wrong, in how I have treated you." The email continued, his normally confident tone replaced by something more hesitant, more human. He acknowledged that he had tried to force me into a life that wasn't right for me, that he had been unable to see the value in a path different from his own. He admitted that his dismissal of my career had been based not on any real evaluation of my work or success, but on his own narrow definition of achievement. "Your grandfather helped me see that I was repeating patterns from my own upbringing," he wrote. "This doesn't excuse my behavior, but perhaps helps explain it. I've begun seeing someone, a therapist, to help me understand why I've been so rigid, why I've valued conformity over happiness." The email ended with a request, not a demand. "If you are willing, I would like to try to repair our relationship, not on my terms, as has always been the case, but on terms that respect who you actually are, not who I tried to make you be. I understand if this is not something you want, or if you need more time. The choice for once is entirely yours." I read and reread the email, trying to process this shift. Was it genuine? Was it temporary? Could people really change so fundamentally? I showed it to Dr. Lynn at our next session, seeking guidance on how to respond. "People can change when they have powerful catalysts for self-reflection," she said carefully. "Your standing up for yourself at Christmas may have been such a catalyst for your father. That said, proceed with caution. Set clear boundaries. Look for consistent behavior change over time, not just words." I crafted a careful response, neither rejecting his overture nor rushing into reconciliation. I acknowledged his email and expressed appreciation for his reflection, but made it clear that rebuilding trust would take time and consistent effort on his part. I suggested we start with occasional phone calls before considering in-person meetings. Most importantly, I stated clearly that any future relationship would need to be based on mutual respect, including respect for my career and life choices. Around the same time, I received separate messages from other family members. My mother's email was emotional and apologetic, expressing regret for not having stood up for me over the years. "I was so afraid of upsetting your father that I forgot my most important job was protecting my children. All my children," she wrote. "I have every one of your books, Isadora. I read them when I miss you. I am so proud of what you've created, and so sorry. I never told you that when it mattered." Katie called regularly, our relationship growing stronger, without the shadow of family dynamics hanging over us. She shared that she had started standing up to our father in small ways, inspired by what she called my Christmas courage. Even Thomas reached out awkwardly at first, sending a brief email about a client whose child was a fan of my books. This led to occasional professional exchanges. He asked for my opinion on an intellectual property case his firm was handling involving creative rights. I consulted him on contract language for my new publishing deal. These professional interactions gradually evolved into more personal connections. 6 months after Christmas, a significant opportunity arose that tested our fragile reconciliation. A major publisher was hosting a launch event for my new original series in New York, featuring my work in their flagship store. Hesitantly, I extended invitations to my family, not expecting them to come, but offering the olive branch nonetheless. To my surprise, they all accepted. My parents booked flights and a hotel room. Thomas arranged meetings with New York clients to coincide with the trip. Katie took vacation days from the hospital. The night of the event, I was a bundle of nerves, partly about the public presentation of my new work, but mostly about seeing my family and my world for the first time. Michael squeezed my hand as we watched the bookstore fill with publishing professionals, young readers, and their parents, and finally standing somewhat uncertainly near the entrance, my family. My father looked smaller, somehow less imposing than I remembered. He had aged in the months since Christmas, the strain of our estrangement visible in new lines on his face. When he saw me, he didn't immediately approach, respecting the boundaries I had set in our careful communications. I made my way through the crowd to greet them. "You came," I said simply. "We wouldn't miss it," my mother replied, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "This is your moment." The event was surreal. Watching my family observe me in my professional element, seeing their reactions as children lined up for me to sign their books, hearing industry colleagues praise my work within their earshot. My editor introduced herself to them, sharing anecdotes about working with me that presented a version of myself they had never known. Confident, respected, successful, on my own terms. After my reading and signing as the crowd began to disperse, my father approached me alone. He held a copy of my new book purchased, rather than expected for free, waiting in line like any other customer for my signature. "I'm proud of you," he said, the words clearly difficult for him to form. "Not because you're successful by conventional metrics, although you clearly are, but because you had the courage to be true to yourself even when it meant disappointing me. That kind of integrity, that's something to be proud of." It wasn't a perfect Hollywood reconciliation. There were still awkward moments, old patterns that threatened to resurface, wounds that would take more than words to heal. But it was a beginning, a foundation for a new kind of relationship based on who we actually were, not who we had expected each other to be. 1 year later, I hosted Christmas dinner in my Brooklyn apartment. The table was mismatched, but festive. The food catered because I still couldn't cook, the conversation occasionally stilted, but increasingly genuine. My father asked questions about my creative process and actually listened to the answers. My mother proudly showed Michael's parents, also invited, her collection of foreign editions of my books. Thomas and his wife announced they were expecting a baby, with a shy request that I might consider illustrating something for the nursery. As I looked around at this imperfect, evolving family gathering, I realized that the young woman who had whispered, "All right," at last year's Christmas table had given herself the greatest gift possible, the courage to be authentically herself, whether or not others approved. That courage had not only changed my life, but had created ripples that were changing my family as well. The path to healing family relationships is rarely straight or simple. Some wounds never fully heal. Some patterns are too deeply ingrained to completely transform. But I had learned that standing up for yourself doesn't always mean walking away forever. Sometimes it creates the possibility for something new to emerge from the ashes of what was lost. My father still occasionally slips into his old judgmental patterns. My mother still sometimes tries too hard to smooth over difficult conversations. I still feel the child inside me craving their approval. But we are all trying, all growing, all learning to see and accept each other as we actually are. And that I've come to believe is what family should be. Not perfect, not without conflict, but a place where each person's authentic self is recognized and valued. If we can't find that in our families of origin, we have every right to create it elsewhere. And sometimes, if we're lucky, our courage to do so creates space for transformation in the very relationships we thought were beyond saving. Have you ever had to stand up to family who couldn't see your true value? How did you find the courage to be authentic in the face of disapproval? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories about finding your voice and creating boundaries with family. Don't forget to share with someone who might need to hear this message today. Thank you for listening, and remember, your worth is not determined by others' ability to see it.